Running a department in a competitive firm meant my career was anything but stalled. It was a high-speed train I had to perpetually fuel myself. I'd dedicated years to reaching this position, sacrificing evenings, weekends, and a significant portion of what others might call a personal life. The competition had been savage on the way up, and now, from my vantage point, it was my job to cultivate and manage that same competitive fire in others. I wasn't thriving in a conventional sense. I was enduring, succeeding through sheer force of will. I had everything I'd once wanted, the power and the respect, yet a quiet, persistent hum of isolation was the price of admission. My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 46, I was a woman most people admired from a distance and feared up close. I had cultivated that persona meticulously. Bright, professional, and unyieldingly rigid, these were the components of my armor. I never ever discussed my private life at the office, and my team knew better than to ask. This absence of personal detail created a vacuum that speculation rushed to fill, but it was all just static. There was no husband, past or present, to mention. My desk was a sterile landscape, devoid of smiling faces in silver frames. Casual chatter about weekend plans was a language I didn't speak. There was only the work, and I demanded that same singular focus from everyone on my floor. It was a standard Wednesday evening, the kind that bleeds into night without permission, and I was feeling the familiar ache of fatigue deep in my bones. The open-plan office was mostly deserted, the glow of monitors extinguished one by one as people surrendered to the call of home. I, however, had stayed late to finalize the quarterly strategy review. When I finally saved the document and shut down my computer, all I could envision was the blessed quiet of my apartment, a scalding hot shower, and a generous glass of Pinot Noir before collapsing into bed. Packing my briefcase, I walked toward the elevator bank, my mind already checking out. I pressed the down button and waited, leaning against the cool marble wall, massaging my temples to ward off a looming headache. The doors slid open to reveal a single occupant, Liam Peterson, looking just as drained as I felt. He was leaning against the back wall, but he straightened instantly when he saw me. Just as the doors began their inexorable slide to close, I stepped inside. "Liam," I acknowledged with a curt nod, my voice clipped with its usual professional tone. "Ms. Vance," he replied, his posture becoming even more erect, a soldier in the presence of a general. The doors sealed us inside, and the car began its smooth descent. Just the two of us. I could feel the palpable tension that always arose when an employee was cornered with me, especially a subordinate as earnest and quiet as Liam. I'd never quite figured out how my team perceived me, but I knew I wasn't easy to be around. I wasn't unkind, but I offered no warmth, no conversational openings. I was the sort of boss you obeyed and respected, not one you'd ever share a casual joke with. We descended in a charged silence for a few floors before the elevator jolted violently, shuddering to an abrupt halt. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then plunged us into absolute darkness. "What the hell?" I heard him mutter, his voice a low tremor in the sudden blackness. Unflustered by the jolt, I reached into my handbag, my fingers immediately finding my phone. I activated the flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a stark cone through the gloom. I methodically pressed the button for the lobby, then the door open button. Nothing. No response. I let out a controlled sigh and pressed the bronze-rimmed emergency call button. A burst of static crackled from the speaker before a distorted voice materialized. "We're showing a citywide power outage. We are aware of the stalled car. However, it may be some time before we can get the system running on emergency power. You're going to have to sit tight for a bit." "How long is a bit?" I inquired, my voice betraying no emotion, steady and firm. "We're estimating at least an hour, possibly longer, ma'am." I felt a knot of irritation tighten in my gut. Being trapped in a confined metal box was a logistical nightmare, an unscheduled disruption I had no patience for. and sharing the experience with a junior employee made it all the more tedious. I wasn't prone to claustrophobia, but the complete lack of control over the situation, the forced inactivity, was grating. I sighed again, this time with more feeling, and leaned my shoulders against the wall. "Great," he breathed out, a soft puff of air in the small space. He was trying, and failing, to sound composed. "So, I guess we just wait?" I cast the beam of my phone toward him, then back to my own screen, which confirmed the lack of a signal. "We wait," I confirmed flatly. We stood in a heavy silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the faint, high-pitched hum of the emergency systems and a distant, muffled siren from the street below. Time seemed to stretch and thin, each second ticking by with deliberate slowness. I watched him shift his weight from one foot to the other, his agitation a stark contrast to my stillness. "So, he began, his voice a little too loud in the quiet. "Do you think this will disrupt anything important tomorrow?" He was clearly desperate to fill the void. I looked at him, the phone light catching the anxiety in his eyes. I debated ignoring him, just letting the silence resume its reign, but something, perhaps the sheer absurdity of the situation, made me relent. "Probably not," I said, my tone softening fractionally. "I have a morning briefing that may need to be pushed, but it's manageable." "Right." He nodded quickly, a little too eagerly. He cleared his throat. Another long, drawn-out silence descended. "You seem nervous," I stated, not as a question, but as an observation. My directness often had this effect on people. He let out a short, forced laugh. "Yeah, well, it's not every day you get trapped in an elevator with your boss." I raised an eyebrow at that, but offered no reply. He shifted his weight again, the sound of his dress shoes scuffing the floor. Do you ever get nervous?" I expected myself to shut the question down with a curt "no" or a pointed silence. Instead, I found myself tilting my head, actually considering it. "Not often," I answered. There was a finality in the way I said it, a statement of unshakable fact. It was a core part of my identity. "Must be nice," he said, the words carrying a trace of genuine envy. I looked at him again, my gaze more focused this time. "What makes you nervous, Liam?" He hesitated, and I saw a flicker of something in his expression. It wasn't just about being trapped. It was deeper. Just feeling stuck. The words tumbled out before he could censor them. Not pushing forward. I think once they came out, he realized how true they were. It wasn't just about being in this elevator. It was his career, his life. I didn't say anything right away. I simply studied him in the stark beam of my phone's light. To his evident surprise, and even my own, I gave a small, slow nod of acknowledgement. I understood that feeling more than he could ever know. And for the first time since the car had shuddered to a halt, I felt the rigid tension in my own shoulders begin to ease, just a fraction. The silence that followed in the elevator felt different, less heavy. I checked my phone again out of habit. Still no signal. I stood with my arms crossed, a posture of waiting that I had perfected over many years. Liam, however, was a bundle of nervous energy. His mind was clearly racing, a stark contrast to my enforced calm. It wasn't just that we were trapped together. An unwelcome intimacy forced upon us. After another minute, he shifted again, trying to work out the nervous tension. "So yeah," he started. "Have you been in a situation like this before?" I glanced over at him. "Once. A long time ago." I fully intended to leave it at that, a closed door. But then, to my own surprise, I continued. I was in college, got stuck on a subway car between stations for nearly 2 hours. People were starting to panic, but I just found a seat and read a book. I decided there was no point wasting energy on something I had absolutely no control over. He managed a small smirk. That sounds like you. I arched an eyebrow but didn't dispute the assessment. He was right. I leaned my head back against the cool metal wall and stared up at the dim emergency light. You don't seem like the type to panic either. I don't, I confirmed. I tilted my head slightly, my gaze analytical. You, on the other hand, do. I wouldn't say panic, he mumbled, his defensiveness betrayed by the nervous energy still radiating from him. You're anxious, I observed plainly. He finally let out a long sigh of capitulation. Okay, fine. It's not every day I get an impromptu one-on-one with my boss inside a dead elevator. That almost made me smile, a tiny, barely perceptible twitch at the corner of my mouth. But it was there. It was likely the first time he had ever seen my expression shift from its default setting of solemn professionalism. He seemed to take my micro-expression as an encouragement and paused before speaking again. Can I ask you something personal? I gave him a slight nod, a silent, non-committal permission. Why are you so private? I mean, nobody at the office knows anything about you. I held his gaze for a long moment before letting my eyes drift away. Because it's work, I stated simply. A personal life is just that. Personal. Yeah, but even the most private people let something slip occasionally. A faint, humorless smirk touched my lips. And what about you, Liam? What do people at the office really know about you? He seemed to consider it for a moment. Not much, I guess. Exactly, I said, my gaze returning to his, sharper this time. You maintain your privacy as well. So why question mine? He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of concession. You make a fair point. I sighed and leaned my weight against the opposite wall, mirroring his posture. But if you must know, I found myself saying, it's simpler this way. When people think they know you, they form expectations. He frowned. Expectations of what? I paused, the air growing heavy again. For the first time, I was genuinely debating how much to reveal. I've had people assume they could get something from me, I finally admitted, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. That my success means I owe them something, or that I'm obligated to be generous. I didn't need to be explicit. He was smart enough to understand the implications. He nodded slowly, his expression serious. That has to be frustrating. I let out a short, dry laugh that held no mirth. You have no idea. He hesitated for a second before pressing on. Do you mean guys assuming? I gave him a look, not of anger, but of a deep, weary resignation tinged with amusement. Among others. He processed that for a moment. I wasn't just successful. I was a woman in a position of significant power. I could see the understanding dawn on his face, how that combination would lead people to make all sorts of presumptions. That sucks, he finally said. I smirked. So articulate. He chuckled softly. I'm just saying I get it. People not seeing you for who you actually are. I looked at him again, but this time my gaze lingered. He saw it. He actually saw it. To my own astonishment, I nodded. Exactly. He shuffled his feet, as if he sensed he'd just crossed some invisible important line. I get it too, he said quietly. I don't mean in the same way, obviously, but I work my ass off and I'm still stuck in the same place. I feel like no matter what I do, I can't seem to get ahead. My expression softened, the change so subtle he might have missed it in the dim light. And you believe you deserve more? He shrugged, a gesture that was half defiance, half exhaustion. I believe I've earned the chance to prove it. A long silence settled between us, but this time it was comfortable, weighted with shared understanding. Then I said something that I knew would surprise him, something I had never said to an employee before. You probably have. He blinked, his mouth parting slightly. Wait, what? I exhaled slowly. I've seen your work, Liam. You're one of the few who consistently puts in the effort. But effort alone isn't always enough. You need the right people to notice you at the right time. He scoffed lightly. So, it's just luck? Sometimes, I conceded. And sometimes, it's about knowing how to make yourself stand out. That landed. I saw it hit him, because that was precisely his problem. He didn't stand out. He did his job, and he did it well. But he never did anything to make himself indispensable, impossible to overlook. He opened his mouth to say something more, but before a word could escape, the main lights in the elevator flickered and then flared to life. A second later, we heard the low hum of the motor engaging. The car gave a slight lurch and then resumed its smooth descent. I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. I glanced at my watch. 43 minutes. Well, I said, my professional mask sliding back into place as I pushed myself off the wall. Our brief, strange interlude was officially over. He nodded, still processing what I'd said. When the doors slid open onto the brightly lit lobby, I stepped out first. Before he could follow, I paused and looked back at him. Think about what I said, Liam. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the open elevator. I felt as if I had just unlocked something, not just for him, but perhaps for myself as well. The elevator incident lingered in my thoughts. It wasn't merely being trapped, it was the conversation that had unfolded in the dark. I had never spoken to Liam in that manner before. I wasn't certain I had spoken to anyone at work like that. My default was always rigid, professional, all business. But for those 43 minutes in the suspended metal box, I had been someone else. And now, I couldn't shake what he had said, or my own surprising response. You've probably earned it. My own words echoed back at me for the next couple of days. I continued my work as usual, conducting meetings and reviewing reports, but something fundamental had shifted in my perception. I started paying closer attention to him in team meetings, noticing how he would now speak up when he had a valid point, rather than keeping his head down. I observed that he made sure his ideas weren't just mentioned, but were articulated clearly and confidently. Then, on Friday afternoon, something I hadn't anticipated happened, though perhaps on some level I had willed it. I was at my desk, putting the final touches on a proposal, when a new email pinged in my inbox. The subject line was simple. A moment. It was from me to him. I had paused for a long second before typing it. Liam, if you have a moment after hours, please stop by my office. I'd like to discuss something with you. Eleanor. That was all. No preamble, no hints, just a direct instruction. After I sent it, I sat back in my chair, my mind coolly assessing the potential outcomes. This was a professional matter, of course, a follow-up to our conversation, but a part of me acknowledged it was also something more. I managed to focus for the rest of the afternoon, but an undercurrent of anticipation hummed beneath the surface. By 6 o'clock, as the office began its daily exodus, my own nerves felt strangely taut. Finally, I heard a soft, hesitant knock on my door. Come in. The door opened and he stepped inside. I was still at my desk, but I had taken off my blazer, and the formidable aura of the untouchable boss had perhaps softened. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. Sit. He did, his posture straight, his expression guarded. For a moment, I said nothing. I simply studied him, assessing the man who had shown an unexpected resilience and a capacity for change. Then I leaned back in my leather chair, letting it creak softly. You've been more vocal this week. He seemed momentarily taken aback. Oh, yes, I suppose I have. I nodded slowly. Good. That's why I asked you here. He straightened even more, his attention laser-focused. All right. I exhaled and tapped my manicured fingernails on the polished wood of my desk. I've been thinking about our conversation in the elevator, about your work ethic, and about the difficulty of standing out. He said nothing, simply waiting, letting me lead. Opportunities don't always fall into your lap, Liam. Sometimes you have to create them. He frowned slightly, trying to follow my train of thought. What are you saying? I tilted my head, my gaze direct. I have a project coming online. It's high pressure and will require significantly more hours and dedication than your current workload. It is not an official promotion, but if it's handled successfully, it will absolutely position you for one. He blinked, processing the information. You want me to take on more work? A faint smirk touched my lips. That is one way of looking at it. The other way is that I am offering you the chance you said you'd earned. I watched him think it through. This was precisely the kind of challenge he needed, an opportunity to become impossible to ignore. I already knew he had nothing holding him back. No partner, no children, no obligations that would prevent him from dedicating himself to the task. He met my gaze and nodded, his decision made. I'll do it. I felt a sense of satisfaction settle over me. Good. I reached for a thick folder on the corner of my desk and slid it across the surface toward him. This contains the full project brief. Take the weekend to familiarize yourself with it, and we'll discuss a game plan on Monday. He took the folder, his fingers brushing against it as he began to flip through the first few pages. It was a substantial undertaking, far more complex than anything he'd previously managed, but I knew it was the kind of high-visibility task that could define a career. He looked up from the pages, his eyes meeting mine. Thank you for this opportunity, Ms. Vance. I gave a slight nod, but just as he was about to stand, I said something that was entirely unplanned. I'm also planning to be at the coffee shop across the street tomorrow morning. If you're free, you're welcome to join me to discuss any initial thoughts you might have. He froze for a fraction of a second. Coffee? With me? On a Saturday? I could see the confusion and uncertainty in his eyes, wondering if this was a mandatory work meeting or something else entirely. I sensed his hesitation and immediately gave him an out, a way to protect us both from awkwardness. No pressure if you're busy, of course. He shook his head quickly. No, I'm not. I'm free. A genuine, small smile touched my lips. Good then. 10 a.m., the daily grind across the street. He nodded and stood, the project folder clutched in his hand. I'll see you there. As he walked out of my office, my own thoughts were a whirlwind. This was no longer just about work. This was something else, and for the first time in a very long time, I had no clear strategy for what came next. I slept fitfully that night, a rare occurrence for me. The invitation for coffee felt like more than just coffee. It was a boundary being tested, a line being crossed, and I was the one who had drawn it in the sand. I had never invited a subordinate to meet outside of work, and the casual, no-pressure way I had framed it somehow made it feel more significant, more freighted with unspoken meaning. When I arrived at the cafe on Saturday morning, I was a strange cocktail of professional composure and personal curiosity. I spotted Liam immediately. He was already seated at a small table in the corner, looking out of place and endearingly nervous. He was wearing a gray Henley instead of his usual button-down shirt and slacks. He looked different, younger, more approachable, less like my employee and more like just a man. As I approached, he looked up, and a flicker of relief crossed his face. He gave me a small, tentative nod. You're punctual, I observed, my tone lighter than it was at the office. He offered a small smirk in return. Figured being late wouldn't be a good look. I allowed a small chuckle to escape and gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. It was a command softened by context. He relaxed slightly as I sat down, and for a moment, we were both quiet, taking sips of the coffees we had ordered. It felt strange to be sitting across from him like this. In the office, our interactions were defined by an unbreachable hierarchy. Here, in the warm, noisy cafe, it felt almost equal. "I appreciate you coming," I said finally, setting my cup down on its saucer. "Of course," he replied. I'll admit, I was a little surprised by the invitation. I held his gaze for a moment. "You're a hard worker, Liam. I see that. But I also see that you've been feeling stuck." He nodded slowly, accepting the assessment. "Yeah, I guess that's fair." I sighed softly and let my gaze drift to the window, watching people hurry by on the Philadelphia sidewalk. "I understand that feeling better than you might think." He frowned slightly. "You do?" I turned back to face him. "You probably look at me and assume I've always had it this easy, that I just sailed up the corporate ladder without any trouble." He shrugged. "I mean, you're the boss." I gave a soft, dry laugh. "I am, but it was anything but easy. It took me a decade to get here, and even after I arrived, the fight didn't stop." He leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, then took another sip of my latte. "People look at me and they see a title. They see authority and power, and they assume I don't need anything from anyone." He nodded. That was exactly how I had trained everyone, including him, to see me. "But the truth is," I continued, the confession feeling both risky and necessary, "it's lonely. No one really sees me, Liam. Not the person. Just the position." I wasn't sure what he would say to that. It was startling to hear myself speak with such honesty. This was a version of Eleanor Vance I kept locked away. He just stared at me for a moment, his expression unreadable. I met his gaze again. "That's why I opened up to you in the elevator. You seemed different." "Different how?" I tilted my head, considering. "You seemed like you were actually listening. As if, for a moment, you didn't just see the boss. You saw a person who was also trapped." He swallowed, and I could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I guess I hadn't really thought of you any other way until then. But when you started talking, things shifted." I nodded slowly. "That's why I wanted to have this conversation. I don't do this often, Liam. Letting people in." I paused, the next words feeling heavy. "But I feel like I can talk to you." Something in the way I said it made his posture change, a subtle tightening in his chest. He looked down at his own coffee cup. "I get it, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" He nodded. "I mean, not on the same level, of course. But I understand what it's like to feel invisible, to work so hard and still feel like nobody is really seeing you." I watched him, a strange sense of recognition passing between us. "Your ex," I began, recalling a detail from our elevator conversation. He tensed slightly. "Yeah, you mentioned in the elevator that she cheated." He let out a short, quiet breath. "Yeah." "I thought we were building something real. Turned out I was just a convenient option." My expression softened completely, the professional mask dissolving. "I'm sorry that happened." He shrugged, trying to dismiss it. "It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make the hurt any less real," I said, and I was surprised by the genuine warmth in my own voice. There was no judgment, no condescension, only a shared understanding of being misread and undervalued. For a long moment, we sat in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable at all. It felt safe. I took another drink of coffee and smiled faintly. "So, about that project." He let out a small laugh. "Back to business already?" I tilted my head, a playful glint in my eye. "What, you thought this was a date?" I saw a faint blush creep up his neck. "No, I mean, I chuckled, a real, relaxed sound. "Relax, Liam. I'm teasing you." He exhaled and shook his head, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "You're impossible to read." I smiled back and leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping a little. "But for the record, I enjoyed this." He met my gaze, his own expression open and honest. "Yeah, me too." I nodded, satisfied. "Good." Then, after a beat, I took the plunge. "Maybe we should do it again sometime." He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." I felt a sense of rightness settle over me, and for the first time since I'd joined the firm, I realized Liam Peterson wasn't just my employee. He was something more. I wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet, but for the first time in years, I was intensely curious to find out. Several months had passed since that first coffee meeting. Things at the office had changed, but in ways that were subtle, almost imperceptible to an outside observer. I still ran my department with an iron fist, and he still did his job diligently. But I had taken notice, and my notice had power. I started including him in higher-level meetings, assigning him to projects with greater visibility, and I began to actively solicit his opinion on strategic matters I hadn't previously discussed with him. It was about more than just his career trajectory, though that was certainly improving. He was advancing within the company, earning the respect he deserved. The most significant difference, however, was in how we saw each other. Our coffee meetings became a regular occurrence, which then evolved into quiet dinners after work. And then one night, I invited him to my apartment. That night, the entire landscape of our relationship shifted. I remember standing by my window, watching the city lights of Philadelphia twinkle below, feeling a tremor of anticipation that was entirely foreign to me. This wasn't just nerves. It was a profound awareness that I was stepping over a threshold, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared for what was on the other side. She was different, and this was different. I opened the door to him, dressed not in a power suit, but in comfortable black trousers and a cashmere sweater. The sharp edges of my corporate persona had been intentionally softened. "You made it," I murmured, stepping aside to let him into my world. My apartment was modern and sleek, but not cold. There was minimalist furniture, clean architectural lines, but also shelves of books and a few carefully chosen pieces of art that made the space feel like a home. I'd never considered what he might imagine my home to be like, but it felt right. It felt like me. I poured us both a glass of a good Cabernet Sauvignon, and we settled on the sofa in my living room, talking with the easy familiarity we had developed over the past few months. But this time the conversation felt weighted, as if we were both circling a topic that we had thus far left unspoken. Then I turned to face him, the crystal glass cool in my hand. "Liam?" Something in my tone made his attention snap fully to me. "Yes?" I took a breath, steeling myself. "Do you regret any of this?" He frowned in confusion. "Regret what?" I let out a soft sigh and swirled the dark red wine in my glass, avoiding his gaze. "This. Us. Whatever this is." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Eleanor, we haven't even really defined what this is." I managed a small, nervous laugh, a sound so unusual for me. "I know," I admitted, "but we're both aware it's something." I watched him set his glass down on the coaster. "Do you regret it?" he asked, turning my question back on me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at him, truly looked at him, as if I were weighing the risk versus the reward. Was he worth dismantling the fortress I had spent decades building? Finally, after a long, silent moment, I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't." I saw the tension in his shoulders release as he let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Good," he said softly. "Because I don't either." The relief was so profound it was almost dizzying. "Liam, this is unconventional. A manager and an employee." "I know." he said gently, cutting me off before I could build the wall back up. But we're not just that anymore, are we? I was silent for a moment. Then I reached out and let my fingers brush against his. It was a fleeting, tentative touch, but it was enough. It was the confirmation I needed that whatever this was, whatever we were becoming, was real and worth the risk. After that night, we proceeded with caution. At work, nothing changed on the surface. We were the epitome of professionalism, maintaining a discreet distance that never betrayed our private connection. But outside the sterile confines of the office, we were together. It wasn't a reckless, passionate affair. It was something far better. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply intentional. Our relationship was built in stolen moments and whispered conversations, in late-night dinners that stretched for hours, and early morning text messages that made me smile before my day had even begun. For the first time in years, I was letting my guard down, allowing myself to be truly seen by someone. And in doing so, I realized that for the first time since my own painful past, I was building something genuine again. A year later, I was standing in my sunlit kitchen, watching him pour coffee, his movements easy and familiar in my space. And it struck me with the force of a revelation. This was my life now. I had the career I had fought for, the respect I had commanded, and I had him. I had a partner. It was a future I could never have designed, a happiness I could never have strategized. Who could have possibly imagined that getting trapped in a dark, silent elevator for less than an hour would so completely and utterly change my life?